private time for the family, very, very close family members who will watch the Queen buried alongside her consort, Prince Philip, in the King George VI Memorial Chapel.
And we should remind people they're both being buried together.
Yes.
Prince Philip has not been buried up till this stage.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? I don't think a lot of us realise that until this week. OK, let's go inside the grounds of Windsor Castle. Susanna Carr and Tim McMillan are there. Give us an update.
Thanks, Nat. Thanks, David. We are inside the grounds with this beautiful castle behind us, this amazing historic building, as the Royal Hearse makes its way towards Windsor. It's been an incredible pageant of people, really, hasn't it, Tim, all the way?
It has massive crowds here. We arrived in here yesterday and you could sense just the enormous rush of people to this beautiful historic town, and easy to see when you come into the grounds here at Windsor Castle why it was such a favourite of Her Majesty. She loved being here. She spent a lot of time here as a youngster, and it's quite fitting that this is where she'll be laid to rest, not just because, of course, it has been such a big part of her life, but it also will place her right next to her beloved Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh.
It's a very special place for her. She has such a history here at Windsor Castle. When her parents were made, when her father was made king, they started to come here more often because they had been coming before with her paternal grandparents being the king and queen, and then when her father became king, they lived here frequently on the weekends. She spent a lot of time here as a child. She actually was relocated here with her sister after the Blitz in the Second World War. The parents stayed in London and Elizabeth and Margaret came to live here. You can hear the incredible reception they're getting all along the way. The crowds have been really astonishing.
Absolutely incredible.
At no point has she been by herself from Scotland right through. You saw it at Northolt in the Air Force Base.
I was blown away. That was the first time she touched down in London after being moved down from Scotland. It was a rainy evening. We were out by the side of what is essentially a highway, and people were 5, 10 or more deep, just crammed by the side of a motorway just to try to catch a glimpse of the hearse coming by. It was quite astonishing, and those crowds have been present through this whole 10-day period of mourning, haven't they? And certainly here in Windsor, we've seen people camping out. I know particularly down on the Long Walk, crowds have been trying to get the best vantage point they possibly can down there, because that is the point at which the procession there with Her Majesty is going to arrive, and that is due to arrive in exactly 40 minutes' time. It's 6 minutes past 3, and knowing how impeccably this procession has rolled out today, Sue, I would be very surprised if it didn't arrive here at exactly 6 minutes past 3.
And it's going to be really interesting to see how many people are there, because yesterday the security forces in Windsor were telling us they were expecting 400,000 people.
Incredible.
Now, they've been arriving all day. Tim and I came into Windsor this morning at about 5 o'clock when it was still dark, but there were just a few people making their way then, and it just started to build and build and build through the morning. And of course the day has changed so much too. When we first arrived it was drizzling and cold, very, very cold. Beautiful day now, and with the organisers having changed the route from the major roads to the A roads through England, this is the reason so many people are getting the chance to see the passage of the Royal Hearse as it goes along. Look at these people. Everywhere you go, people, people, people. And when you consider how many people queued to see Her Majesty's coffin while she was lying in state at Westminster Hall, and now they're making the extra effort too to come and see the passage of the Royal Hearse as it makes its way on this journey that's normally about
an hour
less
or so.
Than an hour, and this one's going to be around about 2 hours. It's a long time, this one.
Which is really important, I think, for the people who are lining those roads there. It gives them just an extra moment, I suppose, to just acknowledge the Queen as she passes by in that hearse. We've noticed too, just in the last little while, some of the coaches arriving here at Windsor. As Sarah mentioned before, there will be dignitaries here, Prime Ministers and Governors General from around the Commonwealth who'll be present here, but in that congregation of about 800 at that committal service here, a lot of the staff who have worked with the Queen over many years, a really special opportunity for them.
What people don't realise is there's about 150 people who live within the grounds grounds of Windsor Castle, who are the staff for the royal family and the castle itself. And they are people who know the Queen really, really well. They've lived with her for many years, some for generations of families, and they are going to be included in that service this afternoon, which is a very special thing for them. And of course, it's serviced in two parts, because they have the service and then the body is lowered into the royal vault, and after that taken to the chapel of George the Sixth, where the Queen will be reunited with her husband, who's been in waiting for her at the royal vault
all this time.
Yeah.
And such a contrast to his funeral. I mean, that now iconic image of the Queen sitting on her own, of course,
So
during
sad.
the peak of COVID restrictions, when there could only be such a limited number of people to say farewell to Prince Philip. It was almost an eerie, it was stoic, but it was quite eerie and sad, wasn't it, seeing the Queen sitting there all on a lonesome
And
in
then,
the
of
chapel.
course, there was the fact that he
Compared to now,
wanted such a simple
phenomenal.
ceremony, which was allowed to happen because of the COVID situation, but his coffin was borne in on a Defender that had been specially designed to reflect his military background and his love of
It's
the
a good car.
outdoors.
We might go back to Michael and Angela, who are still in London as we speak. The procession, the hearse that we can see there carrying Queen Elizabeth, is still en route to Windsor, as I mentioned, due in about 37 minutes' time.
Yeah. All right, Sue, Tim, thank you. I don't know whether you shared this moment. Angela and I have literally bells ringing in our head right now, but it's a majestic backdrop to be against. But there was one moment we haven't paused and reflected on, Sue and Tim. I don't know whether you felt the same thing. The bit that punched my heart straight away, and I think you were the same, was the mass pipes and the drums
right here
at the beginning, and then that soul pipe at the end, which was of the entire service. And I'm sure a lot of people watching this were exactly the same. That's when the tears began. That the power preceding the service, the funeral, the state funeral, and then immediately following, it was just so incredibly powerful. I don't know whether Sue and Tim, you were hearing that and getting that same sensation there. I think they were the most emotive moments of the state funeral that we've seen so far.
Very much so. We've listened to some rehearsals that have been going on in the castle grounds while we've been waiting for you as well, and the bands are playing within the castle grounds. We've seen some of the troops arriving who are going to be part of the ceremony. It's going to have a whole emotional side this side again, and knowing how dear this place has been to the Queen as well, the fact that she chose to relocate here and not go back to Buckingham Palace, there's such an emotional connection to this castle.
Yeah, there is indeed. Speaking of the castle, Sue and Tim, Angela, let's just talk a minute about the King George VI Memorial Chapel, the private segment of this. As we've touched on throughout the day, the bit that we're obviously not going to see, understandably so, in the whole ceremony of today. It's a very special place.
It is a very special place because it is where the Queen's family are buried. It's private to them. It is the moment when, as we kept saying for the last 10 days, the royal family have had to share their grief and their mourning with the nation, with the public. This will be the moment when they have an opportunity to genuinely mourn in private, because this is the moment when we will have seen earlier in the ceremony, later this afternoon, where we will watch the Queen's coffin actually sink on that lift down into the vault. That will all be public. It's going to be photographed. It's going to be filmed. But once the family go in at 7:30 this evening, there will be no cameras. It will be very private. And that will be the moment when the King will see his mother actually buried. They'll be able to scatter earth on the coffin, earth that's come from the Frogmore estate, which was so precious to Queen Victoria. It will be a very, very private moment for them. And as we've been saying, that is when Her Majesty will be able to rest in the bosom of her family again. I think I've seen a quote somewhere where she said, "We will be four again," the four being the King, the Queen, her sister and herself. But of course there will also be Prince Philip there. And I still think that it's one of the most romantic parts of their 74-year marriage that he said, "I will wait for you." and he's waited, and they'll be buried together.
Sue and Tim, what are you starting to see there at this stage? I mean, it's wonderful looking at the images along the route as well. So many people being able to get an extra chance to come out and see Her Majesty before she settles back into Windsor for the final ceremonies.
Couldn't quite hear all of what you were saying
The
there,
bells are
Michael.
making it very difficult.
The bells where you are. We're under a very busy flight path here.
It all round, trust me. I think we could, Angela and I could barely hear each other standing
and all
next to each other at
sorts
this stage.
buzzing over every few minutes. But just on that, this will be a no-fly zone here very soon, so it will be quiet here at least. Just on that service, though, I think one of the really powerful moments that will be coming up that we will get to see as a viewer at the end of that committal service, we will have the Sovereign's Piper playing a lament and then a blessing from the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then we're actually going to hear the national anthem. And that really will bring that committal service to a conclusion, and that will be also the conclusion of the public ceremonial arrangements here in Windsor. After that, it becomes a very private and family affair. There will be some period of time before that private ceremony is held, where she will be transferred into that St George VI chapel.
King George
VI chapel within St George's Chapel.
Yes.
Here at Windsor,
which was commissioned for her father, so the family could be together. And there's the we four: her father, her, and her sister, and herself, and then of course Prince Philip as well. So it really is a very special and intimate chapel for them. Interestingly enough, all kings and queens are buried here now, and have been since about 1760, I think, when they stopped burying them or interring them at Westminster Abbey. Interestingly enough, Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert aren't in the St George Chapel. They're actually over at Frogmore Mausoleum near Frogmore Cottage, which is on very marshy ground and not in great condition, so that's being restored. But interesting that the other great female monarch who's within the grounds of Windsor isn't in the chapel. Another connection to Frogmore Cottage is that some of the soil that will be tossed onto the coffin will be coming directly from Frogmore Cottage, the mausoleum there. So all sorts of connections there as well. Some of the other incredible knowledge that we've acquired in the last day or two. The coffin itself, made from English oak, from Sandringham Estate, and made some time ago.
Has been made for decades. So obviously, you know, preparations have been on foot now for some time. And we were talking to, we've met so many people while we've been here in Windsor, and we've been talking about the rehearsals that have been going on for the last 5 days, which included the bearers carrying a pretend coffin that was weighted down. But the interesting thing is the real coffin weighs 1/4 of a ton. So when you see those 8 men, those coffin bearers, not even grimacing, they are carrying a very large weight. And apparently during the rehearsal they were only carrying something that was 3/4 of the weight, and then they had to lift the weight up, and they really felt the difference between those, the original, what the coffin's going to be and what they were practicing with. I suppose when it's solid English oak and lined with lead, it's quite a weighty object. And interestingly too, Queen Elizabeth I was buried the same way. It's something that's happened time and time again for monarchs over the last 400 years. And I suppose when you look at all of the incredible tradition and protocol and process and all the pageantry that we've seen, not just today, but in the build-up to today, when you strip all of that away, ultimately this is just a pretty simple story of the Queen being reunited with their family. You mentioned before about the 4 of us, you know, and this mantra, we have to stick together. Finally, they will be together in a matter of hours. So we're just under half an hour away. We can see some pictures there of that procession still making its way towards Windsor. In about half an hour's time, we'll see it reach the Long Walk. The Long Walk itself, Sue, now you've been here to Windsor many times over the years for royal events particularly. The Long Walk, it's a magnificent tree-lined avenue, isn't it? It's a beautiful part of Windsor Park. It's a long straight road that goes from the top of the hill, actually further from the top of the hill right down. It is a long walk, let me tell you. But the interesting thing is you can only
You can only actually walk on it as a member
Yep.
of the public, ride a bike or ride a horse. But if you're a member of the royal family, you can come in by car because that's their entrance. Inside the grounds now,
Yeah.
things are starting to happen.
We're seeing some of the dignitaries and others invited arriving here at Windsor Castle. Just talking about the long walk, King Charles will not be accompanying that funeral procession down the long walk. He is
I
on
think
his
you'll find
way
they're
here.
already here.
Probably already here at Windsor Castle. He is going to basically stay at the castle and meet those invited members of the congregation here.
So
and
it will be the
sometime after
hearse
that, the
coming
procession
back.
will arrive here too. Let's go back now to Michael and Angela in London.
Yeah, Tim, Susanna, thank you for that. I would not be surprised at all, Angela, if the King and the various parties who marched behind the procession just have a quiet moment to put their feet up for a tick. There's been a lot of ceremony today, and again, the most important part, privately for the family, is yet to come. You know what we should talk about, because we haven't had a chance yet.
Yes.
Angela, as you were so expertly narrating some of the commentary as the procession moved along the Mall past the palace, behind us here also, there was the mass exodus, which we certainly covered all the arrivals.
Yes.
But we didn't accurately cover the exodus of all these VIPs and dignitaries of 2,000 guests. Not as well coordinated as the way in,
No.
but they've all now dispersed. And it's fascinating around here, despite the din of the bells, I'm now calling it a din. I was a bit more joyous about it half an hour ago when they started. Bear with me, I'm not being grumpy, but it is what it is right now. But when they all moved in such precision through various doors, and we saw President Biden arrive, we didn't see him leave at all.
Nope.
He was taken out the side to a secret area where that motorcade of his, that highly fortified motorcade, could get out faster, because on this side, the Abbey literally just gorged all of those VIPs, and then there was a queue of buses and coaches and various cars to get them all out of there. And we saw some of the young royals as well jump a bus.
They did.
Yeah.
In fact, we were saying, oh look, there's this one and that one and the
Yeah,
other.
the Viscount
How
Seven
are
was there
How
and
are
the
they going to get
sisters, Lady
home? And I
Louise.
said to you, I think they're going to get in the van, the
Yeah.
people carrier. You said, no, they'll get in the
Is it-
cars. No, they didn't. They got in the people carrier.
I saw our Australian of the Year, Dylan Alcott, very briefly. He moved around the Abbey for a bit, searching for the rest of the party. I saw him in the distance hook up with the rest of them, so clearly searching for Bus Australia to get on out of here. But it is remarkable that this part of London now that was so sealed off for many, many hours. We've been on air now for almost 13 hours, and certainly before that time, this area was locked down, as we spoke about.
And there's a contrast, isn't there?
Isn't it?
Because
Yeah.
we had the police and the armed services behind us forming a guard of honour here on the road. We had police absolutely everywhere, men marching up and down, going to their various posts, and all of those people arriving. Now, the street is absolutely totally empty, with the exception of a group of helmeted policemen at the far end there. It's almost as if they've abandoned us, Michael. We're on our own again, aren't we?
Oh, they've given us the bells, so they're...
Yeah, we got the bells. Quasimodo and us, we've got the bells.
They've done the smart thing and got out of it. But no, it was quite interesting to watch the
Yes.
contrast, and we just didn't have a chance to check in with
But they
everyone.
did
and-
pour out, didn't
Oh,
they?
they poured out
I wish you
immediately.
could have
Yeah.
It was like a river that just came straight out, and they all gathered behind us, I suppose, talking about the service, what
Yeah.
they thought about it, what their feelings were.
Only reading their body language from here, but we are so close. There was the solemnity for which they arrived was a little bit of celebration when they left.
Yes.
And I think they were uplifted. I mean, that service did do that toward the end as well. And of this staggering gathering of people from around the world, from, the great, the good, the community, and all the people that were handpicked. I mean, that is a very, very unique camaraderie to share and experience today.
Yes, and I think that was rather nice, actually, to see that change in, as you say, body language, because everyone has been so very solemn. But now that they've experienced that part of today's celebrations, today's services, that to be able to come out and then share that experience with each other, I think was very special for them.
Yeah, indeed. Just thought we'd share that all with you because it was an interesting observation that we didn't get to broadcast earlier. Sarah Greenoch, let's go back to you. Now, the procession is headed your way. Wonderful scenes as we've been following the helicopter with the motorcade. Well, what's happening where you are?
Well, my Michael, people here are certainly looking forward to being a part of this day, but their connection to the Queen goes a lot further than what is happening today. We have to remember that this castle, Windsor Castle, was home to kings and queens, or has been home to kings and queens for 1,000 years. It is a building punctuated with history, but for Queen Elizabeth II, this was also her home, and Windsor is a relatively small town. The population of the town itself is only about 32,000, and in speaking to people who live here, they had a connection to the Queen unlike other people in this country. They would see her. They would see her wearing that iconic silk headscarf, riding her ponies. She learnt how to ride horses here as a little girl at the age of 4. Her grandfather gave her her first pony. She loved the Windsor Horse Show. It was one of her favourite events, and we actually saw Her Majesty at that event in May this year. We weren't expecting her to go due to those mobility issues, but she showed up. She was smiling in the car, loving it. One of the final engagements that we saw her do actually with her daughter, Princess Anne, was go to a hospice. Again, really close to here. It was a hospice that she had opened, and it was one of the very last things that she did. Yesterday, we went to Windsor Great Park, which is this amazing 5,000 acres of lush greenery. There's red deer there. There are 3 gardens there. It is a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. And we went up to this statue of Her Majesty. It is actually the only full-size statue of Elizabeth in the UK, if you can believe it. It was commissioned for her Golden Jubilee back in 2002. And there were 2 rangers there tidying up the flowers and the tributes that had been left to Her Majesty. And you could tell that they were genuinely moved by being there. It is sort of in the middle of nowhere. You have to walk quite a while to get there. And then 2 stewards just before were watching our coverage, because we're lucky enough to have the screen so we can see what's going on. And they saw us, 7 News, playing that clip of the Queen with Paddington Bear from her Platinum Jubilee in June, and the stewards just stopped in the middle of the street and they wanted to reflect and talk about what an amazing moment that was as well. So people here do have a real connection to the Queen that goes beyond what we've just seen on television. They've seen her in the flesh. They've seen her going to Royal Ascot races, or going to the polo, or being with her family. And Nat and Koshi were just talking before as well about the prominent position that Sarah Fergie had. I don't know if that is entirely surprising, given that we know that Fergie was very supportive after the death of the Duke of Edinburgh last year. She would walk with the dogs, with the corgis and the Queen in Frogmore Gardens. We know that she and Prince Andrew have now taken on the Queen's dogs as well. They only live about 5 kilometres away at Royal Lodge. Edward and Sophie, someone who she was also very close to, they live about 17 k's away. And then the Waleses, the new Prince and Princess of Wales, they only just moved into Adelaide Cottage the weekend before the Queen's passing. So her family were here as well. It was a very special place to Her Majesty, so it is really fitting that it is her final resting place.
Sarah, it's interesting that you were saying there that in Windsor you have the only statue of Her Majesty the Queen in the country, and you may know that there's talk perhaps of having another statue made and put on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square. Now anybody that's visited Trafalgar Square recently will know that there are 4 plinths beyond the lions and the Lutyens lions and that wonderful memorial to Nelson, but there is a plinth which stands empty, and it's had all sorts of bits and pieces put on it. At the moment it's got, would you believe, an ice cream cone with ice cream on it and ants crawling over it. Not my taste in any kind of that kind of work at all. But if we had, it's the perfect place, I think, for us to put a statue to Her Majesty the Queen.
Indeed,
and it may well happen.
Sarah, what have you got there?
Yeah, Angela, you are correct that they've just taken down that ice cream statue, actually. So I would not be surprised at all if we did see something dedicated to Queen Elizabeth II there. We've just got a band about to come past us as well. So we've seen these various regiments move in. We had the Grenadier Guards go past us quite some time ago now. There's 101 rank and file and 3 officers from the Grenadier Guards who will be forming this Guard of Honour. And I'll just let you well, listen to this as they go past. We're very fortunate to be in this position, a real front row seat to history, like you guys there at the Abbey. We've had all sorts of bands and regiments go past us in the past hour or so as they prepare for this procession to arrive. know. It is quite something to be here, standing here and watching that all go past. As they prepare for this procession, the family won't be joining the procession until the quadrangle. So we will see members of the household cavalry, various members from the Queen's household, the King's household, and the Prince of Wales household involved in this initial procession once the funeral cortege reaches Shaw Farm Gate, which is just on Albert Road at the beginning of the long walk. We will then see it go up that long walk. All those people who have been camped out there for, gosh, some of them 24 hours now. They arrived last night, or at least about 12 hours since this morning when David Woiwod was interviewing a few of them. So they will finally get the moment to be involved in today and to say one final goodbye to Her Majesty as that procession with Her Majesty's coffin goes up the long walk before coming behind the walls of Windsor Castle. And that will really be quite a moment too, I think. Once it does make its way into Windsor Castle, I think I mentioned before that I don't know if people here have really come to grips with the fact that she is gone. I'm getting some messages from friends who live in London saying it's hit them just watching, even on television today, like our viewers are in Australia, that she is now gone because they've seen her coffin, they've seen that cortege leave London. But I think people will hear, it'll be a different, it'll hit them differently when it actually happens, when she goes behind those castle walls. And then that really significant moment when we see her coffin lowered into the royal vault. And even though we know that is only ceremonial, that is not her final resting place, I remember seeing it last year at the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. It's this incredible black and white diamond-shaped floor. The stones part, it gets lowered down on a lift, and you can't help but be moved by that. It is an incredibly emotional moment to see that. And George and Charlotte, gosh, we've talked about them already, but we're told that they will, depending on how they are feeling, possibly be involved in the family procession here. Regardless, they will be in the congregation. But what a big day for those two little kids. What a big couple of weeks, in fact. They only started at a new school the day that the Queen passed away. So it has been a huge period of change for a 9 and a 7-year-old. A big day today. You saw those little faces and how clearly upset they were about losing their Gangan. So we will see them in the congregation, but possibly not in the procession.
No. All right, Sarah, thank you. They're only about 4 miles away from Windsor now, and that'll be quite a scene. Very, very interestingly, the bells have stopped tolling here at Windsor, which is timed with the official schedule for the coffin to arrive at Town Gate, Windsor. It's almost like the bells have pealed until Her Majesty arrived at the official part of her destination. In practice, they're running a few minutes late, but that's not a big drama in the scheme of things. Nat and Koshi, let's bring you in whilst we have a chat here, and whilst we can also hear ourselves think, which makes it a lot easier for everyone to hear us without the bells, which were wonderful, but we're also very grateful that they've actually stopped, to be honest, Koshi and Nat.
Yeah. And Angela, wonderful description of the service and also the procession. It was just terrific to watch from our point of view as well.
It really was.
Yeah.
It was emotional, but it was also spectacular.
Yeah.
You just could not get your eyes off it this afternoon. What a wonderful few hours we have witnessed through the streets of London.
Look at the hearse getting onto the country roads now, and all of the locals turning out to really feel part of it, Victoria.
Yes, reporters have said that actually in Windsor they've had to shut the town centre now, and the long walk, access to the long walk has been closed simply because everything is full. And that's been the scene pretty much everywhere. They had to shut the area around Parliament Square earlier than originally planned this morning simply because the crowds came and came and came.
Is this the biggest crowd you've ever seen for any event?
Personally, yes. Now, I was in London for the Platinum Jubilee. I covered the Diamond Jubilee. I did Harry and Meghan's wedding and William and Kate's wedding. And the numbers were vast at all of those occasions, but nothing like this, because the action in those instances tended to be centred in one place.
Yes.
This has covered a wealth of space, and the people have just been there every step of the way.
Yeah, that's what we keep saying, don't we? Of course, there were people around the Abbey, and there have been, tens of thousands of people up the Mall we have seen. But then we start seeing these shots of Windsor, and the shots of the people lining that long walk, those high shots. That is incredible, isn't it?
absolutely packed. So either side of the long driveway that goes up to Cambridge Gate is parkland with beautiful old oak trees. It's a wide space, and those aerial shots show that it is completely full. When Harry and Meghan went along there for their wedding procession, there were a lot of people. The mood was just wonderful. There was such a feeling of celebration. But even then, I don't think there were the numbers that we're seeing today.
Okay, so where do Harry and Meghan have their house, and William and Kate, in comparison to where the Long Walk is?
Very, very close.
Give us a bit of a sense, perspective.
Yes, well, if you're on the Long Walk and you look kind of beyond the trees, you can just about see the rooftops to Harry and Meghan's cottage, Frogmore Cottage, which they have decided to keep on. They've renewed their lease on there for another year, 2 years or so. William and Kate's place you can't see from any public area, Adelaide Cottage, but between the two of them is only about 400 feet, so they're not far from each other at all.
And what does Windsor Castle mean to the family?
Oh,
Give
it's
us
so
a
important.
sense.
Yes, well, it's the oldest inhabited castle in the world. Been there since 1066. William the Conqueror was the one that saw that it was built. And for the Queen in particular, it was a very special place. When she was just a girl, her parents lived in Royal Lodge, which is within the grounds of Windsor Great Park. When her father assumed the throne, they weren't able to spend quite as much time there, but they would retreat at weekends. But more importantly, it was during the war that she and her sister Margaret spent most of their time there, and it was from there in 1940 the Queen gave her very first radio address. She was only 14, but she and Princess Margaret spoke to children around the Commonwealth who had been displaced or whose parents had signed up to the war effort. But also during the war, as legend has it, the crown jewels were taken from the Tower of London, wrapped in newspaper and stashed away in the dungeons at Windsor Castle, the understanding being that if the Nazis were ever to take London, they didn't want them to find the crown jewels.
Wow.
That's an incredible story.
Yeah, it's Windsor's a very special place. The Queen also, she used to put on pantomimes during the Christmas period during the war to raise money for the Queen's Wool Fund. And in 1943, she was doing a production of Aladdin, and that was the first production that Prince Philip, who was serving during World War II, he came to see it. And Marion Crawford, who was the Queen's longtime governor, she said when he was in the front row, "I've never seen Elizabeth look quite so animated."
So that's where the great romance started.
Well, it's where it blossomed perhaps more.
Watching
Koshi.
Aladdin.
Watching Aladdin, she looked amazing in her costume. So yes, it's certainly possible. That's where.
Nat's a bit besotted with the romance,
story.
love story between the two.
There were a few hiccups along the way that have been well documented, but it was a love story, wasn't it?
It was.
And in a couple of hours' time, they'll be buried together for all time.
They will. They'll be reunited. And you know, Windsor was where they spent the majority of the pandemic together. They pretty much shut up shop here at Buckingham Palace and moved out to Windsor, where they operated under HMS Bubble, a very loyal team of staff just formed around them and took care of them to make sure neither of them got sick. And so actually quite special, given we lost Prince Philip last year, that as difficult as the pandemic was for everybody, the Queen and Prince Philip were able to have just some very quality, special time together towards the end of their lives.
So Prince Philip's in the vault, and not to get, with great respect,
Yes,
not
of
to get
course.
too gruesome about it, but he's in the vault waiting for. Do they both sort of get buried, or does she go into the vault with him for a period of time?
What we will see at the end of the committal, it's a very good question. Lots of people are curious about how this works. We will see the Queen lowered into the ground in the same way we saw
Oh, she
anyone
will
who
be,
watched
right.
Prince Philip. That goes into the Royal Vault, and there are a number of royals that are in the Royal Vault.
Oh, so the vault's underground.
Yes.
It's not one of the things you see at cemeteries, which is above ground.
Yes, so it's
okay.
underneath St George's Chapel. Later, what we won't see is that Prince Philip and the Queen, both of their coffins will be raised again and taken to the King George VI Memorial Chapel, which is within St George's Chapel. It's a very small corner of the chapel, but it's where the Queen's parents and the ashes of her sister, Princess Margaret, are interred. So this family is really being reunited in the afterlife, but in the tomb. as
And they're
well.
not being cremated.
No.
Right.
Only Princess Margaret was cremated.
So why do they do that ceremony today, putting them in the vault? When will they do the later ceremony?
Well, it'll be quite symbolic, the lowering, and I think for the public, that's the farewell. That's the last time we will see her. And what will be quite moving is the crown jeweller will come in, remove the imperial state crown, the orb and the sceptre, and the symbolism there is the Queen is being separated from her crown for the last time, because that crown, of course, will be passed on to her son. But really, just dropping them into the royal vault, so to speak, very slowly and respectfully, is really just the symbolism for us, the members of the public, because then it's done, then it is over, and it'll just be the family that gathers together for the final interment.
Okay.
After this long 10-day
Yes,
period, yes,
absolutely.
of ceremony. Okay, Victoria, thank you very much. It's absolutely fascinating. Let's go back to Michael and Angela Rippon now.
Yeah, Koshi, Nat, thank you so much. You've had a pretty big day, but you've also got sunrise to get ready for as well, I understand, at this stage. So I think at this stage we'll bid you farewell, but thank you so much for your company today. You've got a busy few hours ahead, I understand.
Yep. Yep. See you in a couple of hours for the complete wrap-up.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good on you. All right, we'll be tuning in for sunrise. Koshi, Nat, thank you so much. And Victoria there as well, obviously, also. You know, Angela, it was interesting as the guys were just talking there. I was looking a little closer at the vision of the state hearse, and I know that the police didn't ask for it to happen, but there was some beautiful flowers on the bonnet and stuck in the windscreen, and just as it was slowing down. And I think that's just a beautiful moment, and that moment you pointed out of people applauding along the route.
Yes, and of course what we should remember is the Queen is going home. This is what is happening now. All the pomp and the ceremony and the majesty that we've seen here in the capital is only part of what the Queen wanted for her final day with her public, with her subjects. What we're seeing is the Queen going home to Windsor. It was her favourite home. It was the place that she actually had a proper household within that castle, and she wanted to be there. She was there during the pandemic, as we've just heard, when she had that small coterie of staff called the Bubble, who looked after both of them. And that's why this, in a way, I was just looking down the order of service that we're going to have, and it's almost a mini version of what we've seen here in the capital. Just looking, you've got, again, the pipes and drums of the Scots and Irish Guards.
Well, they're going to get me again because they did the first time round.
That moment when they went beneath us here, it really got to you, didn't it?
Yeah.
You've got also the Coldstream Guards, the Household Cavalry. You've got the Sovereign's Escort, who will be mounted. You've got the Household Cavalry that will be on foot. You've got the Grenadier Guards, the Queen's colour. You've got all of, again, of that majesty that comes with the armed services in full. Number ones, their regalia, if you like. We'll have all of that, but on a much smaller scale. And I think that's rather lovely because, as we were hearing, she is the first monarch to have had her funeral service here in Westminster Abbey since King George II in 1760-something or other. They've all had their funeral services in Windsor. So she's kind of having a second bite at the cherry. She's going there as well.
There's an interesting thing we should point out, just a technical thing for our viewers as well. Every now and then you might see the aerial shot of the motorcade, and the cortege just disappears for a bit, and we see this majestic vision of Windsor Castle. Because, as many people locally here know, Windsor is under a flight path, and it's a bit tricky with the airspace around there as they navigate the constant stream of jets going in and out. It's often struck me as this wonderful contradiction. You have this piece of Windsor Castle and exactly what it represents, and of course it's been there for 1,000 years.
Before the airport.
Before the airport. But the airport and the commerce and the industry and the travel of this country, of course, comes first many times, and those runways keep going. There was a slight pause today during the ceremony, I understand, but they pulled back the full plan, in fact, to put a halt to all those flights because it just would have been too disruptive, and it's been chaos here anyway. But a great shot there of the stairs leading into the chapel there.
And in fact, people flying into London very often, because the flight path goes over, they're able to look down and see the castle.
The pilot often points it out, doesn't he? If you look left now, you've got Windsor Castle.
There it is. But of course, the Queen and the royal family always used to say, why did they have to build the airport and the flight path over our home?
Well, fair point, but the country's got to keep moving and progressing, doesn't it? This is a magnificent shot there, and of course, as you pointed out earlier, quite rightly, Angela, this is a scene that's been used in the good times and the bad. Obviously, famously last used during...
Here she comes.
During that... the wedding of Harry and Meghan. We were waiting to... Here they go. Let's have a listen to this.
Here they come.
There's a cheer.
Yes.
Respectful cheer, I should say.
Maybe. Maybe that's what it is. Yes, they are. Rather like they do on Henman Hill during
on the big
Wimbledon.
screen. That's why they're excited. Well, that's a good cause to be
Yes, they've
excited
seen
anyway.
themselves. But they're standing guard, you see. The pith helmets tell you that that's the Royal Marines who are giving that guard of honour up. And there, the flowers again on
Oh,
the
they're building,
bonnet of
aren't
the
they?
car.
They're really
Yes.
building. So we're just waiting for, I don't know whether the, on our list here, we're waiting for the State hearse to go through Shaw Farm Gate. But there it is, covered in flowers as it's progressing through Windsor. And I can imagine that is going to be layered in even more flowers when it gets to the Long Walk with all those people lining that route there.
Yes.
And we're just starting to see the start of what I believe is probably entering through Shaw Farm Gate. And from there, this is on the Windsor Estate, heading up to, I think it's Albert Road, then on to the approach to the Long Walk. You can see it's just slowing down slightly
Yes.
here, the motorcade pulling to a stop as well.
Oh, the bells have started again. I can
must-
tell you that they have a very fine farm shop
I'll do that.
right at that gate, a
Yeah.
wonderful shop that sells all the produce from the Royal Estates.
Okay. Well, next when we're out there, Angela, whatever the next Royal event is covering, I'll hold you to taking me there.
Yes.
Have a listen to this.
Procession! By the center! Slow! March!
To the Long Walk. You've now got the household cavalry there on foot. Behind them, the Sovereign's escort. They are, of course, mounted. We'll also have the pipes and drums of the Scots and Irish Guards. And the Coldstream Guards, as you see, are flanking the state hearse. And again, we've gone back to that very slow march, because this now is, as I was saying, it's the equivalent, but on a much smaller scale, of what we had in London when Her Majesty was taken from the Great Hall at Westminster into Westminster Abbey, with the pipes and the drums and the bands and the sailors and the marching soldiers. This is the sort of funeral that perhaps Queen Victoria would have had, that her father, King George VI, would have had, her grandfather, King George V, because they had their funeral services in the St. George's Chapel and not here in Westminster Abbey.
And what a beautiful contrast also, Angela, of now just seeing all of that pageantry which filled the streets of London, now filling the English countryside.
Absolutely. And again, it is, something that the Queen planned. She wanted almost a two-part funeral. It was, we've had the pomp and ceremony in London, and now we've got, if you like, a country funeral in a way, the country funeral for the monarch. She was a country woman, remember. She loved her horses and her dogs. She loved being in the country. And I think one of the reasons why she found Windsor such a beautiful place to call home was because she had Windsor Great Park on her doorstep. She was able to ride her horses there, just in the headscarf, very often out without any kind of pomp and ceremony, and very often, I suspect, with very, very discreet police that were just making sure that the Queen wasn't bothered, if you like. But she used to stop and talk to people while she was in the park, when she was walking her dogs, when she was riding her horses. And there you see Windsor Castle outlined against the sky, and the start of, once again, the King's Royal Horse Artillery giving the gun salute as Her Majesty comes home.
Let's cross now to Susanna Carr and Tim McMillan, who are in the grounds of Windsor and can certainly hear the echo of what's going on and are starting to see this firsthand. Sue and Tim.
So much different seeing the royal procession going through the countryside here, and so different to London. In fact, it's actually more emotional, I find it, because you know she's coming home to where she loved.
And this is it. We're almost at the end of this long procession that's come all the way, really, from Balmoral 10 days ago, all the way here to Windsor Castle. Amazing to see the images too of the gunfire there.
Yes,
Circus.
every
We can
minute.
hear it.
Every minute,
We can
yes.
hear it, but to see the image of there to match it up is quite something. So that's happening out on the east lawn here at Windsor Castle by the King's Troop, the Royal Horse Artillery. We're going to hear the Sebastopol bell and the Curfew Tower bells tolling as well.
Interesting how they had the guns firing in Hyde Park when the Queen's body went to lie in state at Westminster Hall, and now we've got the 1-minute guns sounding from the Long Walk as well. The whole thing about the Windsor area is that it was so much in her heart. The Queen loved coming here. She could ride her horses here. She had all of her dogs here. It was something that became her home 100% of the time. And when COVID struck and she relocated here, it gave her the perfect excuse never to leave. And now she's coming back never to leave.
It is an absolutely enormous property here, isn't it? You only really get a scale from it. From that aerial picture there. Interestingly too, being in the town today, one of the public messages, they've got speakers set up all around the city and periodically they play some public safety messages. One of the repeated messages today has been urging people not to throw flowers at the hearse as it passes by. But as we've seen in some of the images there of the hearse coming down the long walk, some have obviously done that anyway.
And the artillery now lining up at St George's Chapel, getting ready to receive the coffin as it arrives, but it's yet to move into the long walk for that huge, great reception that is going to be received there. So many people. When we saw the aerials, there are the clergy waiting to perform the service, and the crowds will be just so ecstatic to see her when it turns into the long walk itself, which is such a beautiful pathway into Windsor Castle and the lovely entrance at the back end of the castle.
And just undeniably massive crowds. We've seen them gathering over 24 hours or so now. People have camped out for this particular vantage point, and why wouldn't you? It is just such a magnificent avenue that makes its way up to Windsor Castle.
And as we mentioned, this is a service for 800 people, including all of the staff, the household staff from Windsor Castle, people who had a very personal connection to the royal family, and they get their chance to farewell the Queen at this point. And Her Majesty's coffin will make its way down the long walk very, very soon. Look at those crowds, just spectacular, and lined with soldiers and policemen all the way as well.
It's been quite a buoyant
silent? Will it be
atmosphere.
silent?
Look, I don't think so. You know, we often wonder what the crowds are going to be like as the procession moves past. I kind of expected that it will be quiet. And look, some people in the crowd are quiet.
There is a little bit of noise.
There are enough people in there to make some noise as well. And I think the most common reaction that we've seen so far is clapping.
Usually when the hearse has passed by, out of respect, they're so wanting to show some sort of emotion, and that they'll stay silent, and then when the hearse passes by they erupt into clapping. This has been such a different funeral, hasn't it? Because obviously we haven't had a royal funeral of this magnitude, but there's a lot more happiness around it. It's not the solemn affair that you would expect of a funeral, because this is a monarch who's lived 96 years, 96 wonderful years, been loved by her people and the people of the Commonwealth, and it's a life well lived.
And so cherished here in the town of Windsor as well, just walking around here in the last day or two. There's such an affection for her here. The souvenir shops have been absolutely rammed.
And of course the young royal family moving here just recently too. The new Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales and their children moving here. The Prince of Wales having gone to school at Eton here.
Which is not too far away from here, so yeah. Let's take you now to Sarah Greenhalgh, who is just in another part of the town here. She's seen those crowds building throughout the day, just outside the main entrance. Sarah, what are you seeing there?
Tim, just reflecting on the fact that this is a really significant moment. Princess Elizabeth first came to Windsor before her second birthday to visit her grandparents. She was last here on the 21st of July this year before she went off on her holidays at Balmoral, and now she's coming home for the last time. And even though, like you say, Sue, this is a celebration of 96 wonderful years of duty and service and such a rewarding life, it is sad to see this, that she is coming back one more time. And again, having been here for the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral last year, very different. It was a ceremonial funeral. It happened during COVID, but seeing some of those images of the guards lining the steps there on the west steps of St George's Chapel, there are some parallels, some similarities. We know that there are the same song being sung inside that committal service this afternoon. There is a reading that was read out at the Queen's grandparents' funerals and the funeral of her father back in 1952 as well. So there is still so much symbolism. There are 8 floral wreaths that have been placed at the podium inside St George's Chapel, upon which the Queen's coffin will be placed. And they are personal arrangements from family members, royal family members, that they have specifically chosen. Some of the other flowers inside, dahlias, lilies, roses, eucalyptus and greenery that has been cut from Home Park, which is a park inside the walls of this castle. it is moving seeing this, and also interesting to think what the people on that long walk are reflecting on as they see this coffin go past. Personally, I'm thinking about the last time that I was on the long walk, which again was for the Platinum Jubilee celebration in June. We saw Her Majesty come out into the quadrangle of Windsor Castle and light up the globe, which then led to this lighting up of various beacons across the Commonwealth. That's the last time that I was there, and there were huge crowds, but nothing like what we're seeing there today. So people might be reflecting of their fleeting encounters with Her Majesty out in Windsor Great Park, the times they've seen her in this town, the times that they saw her at the Windsor Horse Show or at Ascot or at the Polo. She was such an integral part of this community as well as being their monarch. It is quite something, and there you go, those instruments of state that we've been talking about throughout the day, the imperial state crown, the orb, the sceptre, they are the last time that we will see, well, those people there gathered on the long walk will see those instruments of state as symbols of this monarch. As Victoria mentioned before, they will be passed on to King Charles. They will be symbols of a new reign once his coronation happens sometime next year. But these are remarkable scenes. Look at all of those people. And so different as well to what we saw in London. Buildings in the British capital here, there is so much greenery. It was such a hot, dry summer while the Queen was in residence at Balmoral. And then we had a week of rain a few weeks ago, and now everything is so green again, so back to looking like England should be looking for this really historic day.
Sarah, thank you. There will be a Guard of Honour, an official Guard of Honour, but this, in a sense, is the public's Guard of Honour, isn't it? As that procession slowly moves down the long walk. We've talked, Sue, about some of the hugely important moments in royal history that have taken place here at Windsor. Compare that to when you were last here for Harry and Meghan's wedding. How would you contrast the atmospheres for this occasion?
How do you contrast a wedding with a funeral? But there was such joy and optimism at that wedding 4 years ago. Things have changed slightly. There have been a lot of controversy since then, but the whole royal family was extremely happy when that wedding happened, and there were a few trials during the week, but the reception was wonderful. The royal family are within the grounds of Windsor Castle now. The royal standard is flying, which shows that the monarch is in residence, which means King Charles is here. When King Charles, as he is now the monarch, is not here, the Union Jack flies, but the royal standard went up some time ago. The royal family came in ahead of the hearse. Obviously, the hearse travelled at a much slower speed, so they're all waiting inside the grounds of Windsor Castle for the rest of the service this afternoon and their own private service, which will see the Queen laid to rest with her dearly beloved husband of so many years, the man who she first laid eyes on when she was 13, and decided that that was the man who would be the man for her life, and he was.
And the crowds, how would you contrast the size of the crowds? Was it on this scale for the wedding of Harry and Meghan?
The crowds were pretty strong, but of course it was only in Windsor, it wasn't anywhere else. And the crowds for the funeral of Her Majesty have been right from London, from Edinburgh, everywhere. So instead of being a Windsor-centric situation, this one has encompassed a lot of Britain, and so many people have managed to show their love for the Queen, who they've lost after all this time.
Sarah, there's been, just observing movement around the town, there's been a lot of people milling around. Obviously people have been jostling for a good position on the long walk, but just it feels like there's been people just sort of moving around town and just sort of happy to be a part of it. Are they a bit more still now that the focus is here at Windsor?
They certainly are, Tim. Yeah, we are just off the very centre of the town, obviously outside the walls of Windsor Castle, this incredible 1,000-year-old castle, and they have certainly become quite still. The mood has changed, as we've seen right throughout the past 10 days. When we get to these significant moments, you can sense it. You can sense that people realise the significance of this. We had the same when there was the 2-minute silence during the state funeral, people here did become still and silent. They know how significant this is, and we just saw before there a shot inside St George's Chapel, a 500-year-old chapel, so much royal history, weddings, funerals. Most of the funerals of British monarchs over the past 250 years, all of them actually, in fact, have happened inside this chapel. The Royal Vault, 200 years old, filled with 25 senior and minor royal family members. Of course, we know that that is not the Queen's final resting place, but it will be this symbolic ceremonial moment when we see her coffin lowered into that vault very soon, in fact. So at 3:40, about 15 minutes away, that is when this procession is due to make it to the quadrangle, which is behind the castle walls. That is when we will see it link up with the members of the royal family. 3:53, there will be these minute guns fired, the bells will toll again, and then this committal service, so that we see Prime Minister Liz Truss. So even though the majority of that congregation inside weren't at the state funeral, there is a little bit, obviously, of crossover. The Governor-Generals, the Prime Ministers of the realms, including Australia, of course, and the royal family members as well. So we will see them link up with this procession and walk in. The Dean of Windsor is the one conducting this service, but there will also be prayers from church leaders from the other churches that Her Majesty went to over the years. She was a woman of great faith, and it became very obvious as well in her later years, in her addresses to the nation, in her recent Christmas speeches, that faith had become so important to her in her later years. There was lots of mention of God in many of those final addresses. This will be really special. I think it will feel a lot more personal than what we saw at Westminster Abbey. All those dignitaries, 2,000 people, 800 by comparison here. And again, I don't think people will be drawing parallels between what they see today and what they saw last year with the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, even though it was very, very different. 30 people only allowed at this time, and gosh, look at all those people there. And then there will be those moments where we see the instruments of state removed from the coffin. The King also has a role to play here today. He will put that regimental flag over the coffin. The Queen was the Colonel-in-Chief of the Grenadier Guards, the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards, and so that will be one of the final images we see of the King laying that flag over the coffin before it is lowered into the vault. There you go, people emotional. You can't help but be emotional in this particular moment. This was her home. This was her favourite home, and it is her final resting place.
And the thing that's punctuating all of this in the background is that gun that's firing off every minute. It actually strikes at the heart of you, doesn't it? It really is quite
does.
an emotional
it's
situation.
Deep, bassy noise that just rings around the town, particularly here within the castle grounds itself. We're not too far away from that procession arriving here. And then at 4 o'clock, that is when that committal service will begin, and that will go for about 45 minutes. So really, for the public watching all of this, there's not too much longer to go before the procession moves into very private mode, when it's just really for family to say that final goodbye, which he's moved into that small chapel that's basically an annex within St George's Chapel.
A lot more coverage to take place within the grounds and within St George's Chapel before that point too, so there's a lot more to see, and that will take you inside that beautiful historic chapel that houses so many kings and queens.
Yep.
Henry VIII is there, and
we were chatting just a few hours ago, Sue and I, to someone who's part of the production team that actually is looking after some of the camera work inside that chapel. It was fascinating to hear the level of detail and attention to detail in putting all of that together. Obviously, they've been practicing and rehearsing this now for many years, but just to even make sure that those cameras are in no way obtrusive in what is going on inside that chapel, blending into the walls and the woodwork in that chapel, so you'll barely even notice that they are there.
I think modern technology has become their friend because there are so many remote cameras now, so less people manning those cameras. And I suppose one of the other things, talking about technology and making life more unobtrusive but more personal in a way too, when the Queen moved here during COVID, she had to talk to people via Zoom, and she became really quite proficient at that. And there was this lovely warm side we saw of Queen Elizabeth, when she was having all of those Zoom meetings and chatting with people, either in large groups, and she seemed to be really enjoying herself too. So that those last couple of years, which have impacted on so many of us in so many different ways, set her up in Windsor Castle in a different way. And although she lost her beloved husband, she had a very sort of intensely personal and private life there that she possibly couldn't have had she been a normal monarch working out of Buckingham Palace in a normal situation.
And seeing what we're seeing today, what we've seen over the last 10 or so days, it's almost unthinkable to imagine a scenario where the Queen might have passed away during COVID lockdowns, as her late husband did. I mean, to see everyone here given an opportunity to come out and be a part of this moment, to be a part of history, to say goodbye, to share their gratitude. For this to have happened, you know, it's quite plausible. Might have happened during COVID
I think people
time.
would have felt deprived.
Absolutely.
Because people needed to show their respect.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to London now. Here's Michael and Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna and Tim. You know, as Angela and I are sitting here reflecting on that crowd, we said at the start of the day, didn't we, Angela, that I thought that procession on the Long Walk at Windsor would be one of the images for all time. And we're seeing it right now. It is an absolute full picture of everything that is brilliant about the royal family and of Britain.
It is. And, you know, during the day we've heard so many adjectives to describe what we've seen. Unprecedented, historic, beautiful.
Yeah.
But for me, the word that sticks in my head is dignity. I have been so impressed by the dignity of all sections of the armed services who were there to pay honour to their Commander-in-Chief. I was so impressed with the dignity of the thousands of people, and we can see it here on the Long Walk at Windsor, the thousands who have turned out and in dignified silence watched the coffin and the hearse and the dun carriage go past them. But most of all, I think I've been so impressed by the dignity of the members of the royal family who have recognised the importance of sharing this last journey with Her Majesty's subjects, whilst at the same time wanting so privately to be able to say their own heartfelt love and goodbye to their mother, their grandmother and their great-grandmother.
And I think you're right in saying, too, the dignity of the British public as well, and the visiting public, who, you know, in about 400,000 of them gathered for 4 days, which is how we started this day, and that public vigil coming to an end, the lining of the streets along the Mall around Buckingham Palace as well. And now, this hugely crowd of reverence outside of Windsor leading up to the gates. Angela, I think it has been an extraordinary day. It's hard to put into a lot of words. We've used a lot of words to describe the day, quite rightly. The images, the sounds, they speak for themselves in volumes, and they'll be etched in history for decades to come. They really will. To all of our teams, to Sarah, to Hugh, to Chris Rees, and to Sue and Tim, to Koshi and Nat and Victoria Arbiter, everyone in between who've aligned the routes today to bring us our reporting. I think we're at hour 13 at the moment, Angela, of our coverage, and it's been our distinct honour and privilege to bring it to you. What we're going to see ahead now is the beginnings of the service in the St George's Chapel very, very shortly. It will end, the King will depart, followed by other royals, the rest of the congregation, and then the burial of the Queen, which will be private. Angela, an absolute delight and honour to sit with you today, the past week, in fact, and no doubt in the days ahead we'll wrap up and talk about this a bit more on camera as well. But delightful to sit next to you, and thank you for your company in commentating this major event of history.
Well, likewise, it's been my pleasure and my privilege to be here and to share this moment, not just with you and the team here at Channel 7, but with you, the Australian public.
Indeed.
What a day it has been, and thank you for allowing me into your homes to share this time with you.
For now, though, thank you, Angela. For now, though, we're going to cross over to our broadcast partner in Britain to continue the coverage for the next few hours. Let's go to ITN's coverage now.
Just in the centre of shot there at the bottom, in glasses, Sir Edward Young, the Queen's private secretary. Jamie, you've obviously been a private secretary, the person closest to the Queen in an official capacity.
Yes, I think Sir Edward will be feeling this very, very deeply, as really every day of his life, for however many years he's worked at the palace, which are a fair number now. He would have gone in to see the Queen first thing in the morning with his boxes of correspondence and other matters of state which he would have wanted to lay before her. It was a two-way passage. The Queen would also ask him to arrange things which she wanted to do as well. But he had an extremely close relationship with the Queen, professional relationship as well as coming to know each other extremely well. So Sir Edward will be feeling it hugely today.
What we're witnessing here is the drawing closer together of close household, friends, and of course family. And with that in mind, Lucy, perhaps we could look ahead a little to the service that is going to unfold in the chapel of St George's, the committal service. Just explain to us what that is.
Well, at a funeral there are two elements to it really. You commend the soul of the person who's died to Almighty God, and then you commit their body to be buried. Those are the two elements. So this part, it's a gradual quietening, I guess you could say, from millions watching to thousands crowding to hundreds witnessing, and gradually this day gets quieter, and eventually the body of the Queen will be committed to the ground, and with those words that will be familiar to many, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And it's a very intimate moment, the burial of a person that you love, of course, but it's going to come at the end of a day which has been so full of people and pageantry and noise, and then gradually, with the words of Psalm 103 and Psalm 121, again, much beloved psalms that are used at many funerals, the Queen will be laid to rest, and rest is what it will feel like.
A great sacred duty for the Dean of Windsor, for the Archbishop. It must bear on one enormously in moments like this.
It is. It's an enormous privilege and a duty, and the prayer is very direct. It's actually addressed to the person who's died. It's, go forth upon your journey from this world, O Christian soul. It's a really direct prayer from priest to the person, and with witnesses, and that will be an extraordinary moment.
hearse approaches Windsor Castle itself. Bill, perhaps I can bring you in here to just talk us through what to expect for the remainder of this journey.
At the top of the long walk is the Cambridge Gate, which is short of the castle itself, and at that point the route is no longer lined by the armed forces and they're effectively inside the castle grounds. The procession will go through the George IV Gate into the quadrangle, which is, of course, where the Queen had a birthday parade during the COVID epidemic and many other parades, presentation of the colours to various regiments. There they go through the Cambridge Gate now. And then they will go across to the left to Engine Court and the Round Tower before progressing down through the castle to St George's Chapel. Meanwhile, of course, all other elements are in place at the West Steps, and of course the congregation has gathered in St George's Chapel.
We should mention too, of course, that senior members of the royal family will join the procession too in the quadrangle, and you will see them follow here through down to the chapel itself.
Bill, can I just ask you one thing? We've seen this, the slow forward march and then the steady side-by-side pace. That's just making sure you all keep time.
Yes, as it gets, you obviously want to try and keep the column distance between you and the detachment in front and not run into each other, and you get slower. You don't want to stop, otherwise it's very difficult to get the time again. I think that's probably Terry Pendry with one of the Queen's horses on the right of the picture, from the Mews. That is Terry Pendry, who would take the Queen riding.
Majesty as the procession makes its way slowly and steadily to the top of the Long Walk, away from the crowds who've kept the late Queen company. Just once again, passing the horse she so loved to ride here in Windsor Park. Passing through a tapestry of flowers on either side. And of course the hearse itself covered in the flowers that have been thrown out of great respect and love for the Queen all the way from the Mall down here to the final destination at Windsor.
And in the quadrangle, awaiting the procession, two of Her late Majesty's corgis, Mick and Sandy. Jamie, that'll be one of those images that stays with people alongside all the great moments of ceremony that we've seen.
Corby is obviously very central to both Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's life, and her daughter, Her Majesty's life. And the one bit of instruction you were told when you became a young equerry was to make friends with the Corbys first. It got you 30 love up.
Thank you.